The room was silent, except for the sharp echo of the judge's gavel. Every eye in the courtroom turned toward the young man standing alone at the defense table. Sneakers, hoodie, barely a shadow of facial hair. The judge leaned forward, smirking. "Kid, are you lost? This isn't a high school debate." Laughter rippled through the gallery. But what no one knew, not the judge, not the opposing counsel, not even the packed audience, was that this kid had a plan. A plan so meticulous, so dangerous to the system, that by the end of the day, the laughter would die in their throats. Just that morning, 17-year-old-looking Malik Carter had walked into the courthouse carrying nothing but a worn leather briefcase and the weight of a centuries-old struggle. His deep brown skin and boyish face often made people assume he was a student tagging along for a school trip. Today was no different. The case at hand was small on paper, a misdemeanor assault charge against a local shop owner who had allegedly attacked a teenage boy for loitering. But for Malik, this wasn't just a case. It was personal. The judge, Robert Hensley, had a reputation in the community, notorious for being tough on crime. His court saw a disproportionate number of young black defendants leave in handcuffs, often on charges that barely made it to trial elsewhere. Local whispers painted a picture of a man whose smile hid a deep disdain for people who didn't look like him. Malik's entrance into the courtroom that day was met with raised eyebrows and whispered jokes. "Maybe he's here for career day," someone muttered. Even the court clerk gave him a puzzled look when he introduced himself as representing the defense. What no one realized was that Malik wasn't just a legal intern, nor was he there for a mock trial exercise. He was a fully licensed attorney, one of the youngest in the state, working undercover to investigate judicial misconduct. And the man on trial? He wasn't a stranger. He was the father of Malik's childhood friend, a man whose family had been pushed to the brink by this very court system. From the moment the proceedings began, the judge made it clear he didn't take Malik seriously. "Mr. Carter, I hope you brought notes from your civics class." A chuckle spread across the gallery. Malik kept his face neutral. In law school, he'd learned that the courtroom was as much about performance as it was about precedent, and in this performance, he was willing to play the part of the naive rookie for as long as it took. The prosecution began painting their picture. The shop owner was a respected businessman who had merely defended his property from a troublemaking youth. No mention was made to the bruises on the boy's face, or the fact that surveillance footage contradicted half of the witness statements. When it was Malik's turn to cross-examine, the judge interrupted constantly. "Counselor, we don't have all day. Is this relevant? Stick to the facts, son." Each interruption was like a small cut, designed to make Malik stumble. But instead, he used them to measure the judge's bias, mentally noting every objection sustained against him and every leniency shown to the prosecution. By midday, Malik had subtly shifted the jury's attention. He brought up inconsistencies in the shop owner's testimony, highlighting how his fear seemed selective, only surfacing when teenagers with dark skin entered his store. He introduced the surveillance footage in a calm, methodical manner, letting the jury see for themselves that the so-called threat was nothing more than a boy browsing the candy aisle. Still, the judge's tone grew sharper. "Mr. Carter, if you continue wasting the court's time..." But Malik didn't flinch. Instead, he requested a short recess. During that break, a quiet buzz started spreading among the observers. Some recognized Malik's name from a news article years ago, the prodigy who had passed the bar at 19. But here he was, looking like a high schooler, taking verbal jabs from a judge without so much as a grimace. The tension in the room thickened. The prosecution smirked, confident that the judge's favoritism would tip the scales. What they didn't know was that Malik's real case wasn't about the shop owner's guilt or innocence. It was about catching Judge Hensley in the act of judicial misconduct, on record, in front of witnesses, and under the scrutiny of a legal observer hidden quietly in the back row. The next morning, Malik arrived early, suit pressed, tie perfectly knotted, but still carrying that same youthful face the judge couldn't take seriously. Halfway through the proceedings, Malik asked for permission to call an additional witness. The judge rolled his eyes. "Mr. Carter, this isn't amateur hour." Malik stepped aside, and a tall woman in a navy blazer walked in. She wasn't a character witness. She wasn't a local. She was from the State Judicial Oversight Committee. "Your Honor," Malik began, his voice calm but resonant, "before we continue, I'd like to enter into the record an official inquiry into the conduct of these proceedings. This includes the disproportionate interruption of the defense, prejudicial language used by the court, and a failure to uphold impartiality as mandated by the Code of Judicial Conduct." The room went still. The judge's smirk faltered. Malik continued, producing a folder from his briefcase. Inside were transcriptions, time-stamped recordings, and comparative analysis of the judge's behavior toward defense attorneys of different races across multiple cases. Gasps filled the air. The teenager was no lost kid. He was a licensed attorney, backed by the state, here to investigate and expose bias in Judge Hensley's courtroom. The judge's face flushed. "This is highly irregular." "No, Your Honor," Malik replied firmly. "What's irregular is a court where justice depends on the color of the defendant's skin." By the end of that week, Judge Hensley was placed under formal investigation. News outlets swarmed the courthouse, replaying clips of Malik's calm dismantling of the system stacked against him. Community activists called him a hero. Legal scholars called him a strategist. But Malik simply called himself a lawyer doing his job. In interviews, he refused to take personal credit. He told reporters, "This isn't about me. It's about every young person who's been told they're too inexperienced, too unimportant, or too powerless to stand up for themselves, especially when that judgment comes before the facts are even heard." For weeks, the courthouse steps became a gathering point for those demanding fairness in the justice system. The footage of that smirk disappearing from Judge Hensley's face became an online rallying cry. Malik went back to work quietly, his briefcase a little heavier with the weight of what he'd accomplished, but his eyes already set on the next courtroom where bias needed exposing. Because the fight against injustice wasn't about one judge, one trial, or one young lawyer. It was about forcing the system to look itself in the mirror and daring it to change. And to anyone watching who'd ever been underestimated, Malik's story carried a simple, unshakable truth. Never mistake youth for weakness, and never mistake silence for the absence of a plan.